All right, it's 12:30, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Sarah Sims, and I'm the Assistant Director of Professional Development for the Brown School here at Washington University in St. Louis. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Open Classroom series. Open Classroom, if this is your first time, it is the Brown School's virtual and free professional development series. Beyond Open Classroom, we offer a lot of professional development opportunities that can get you continuing education units and things like that. We offer workshops almost every single Friday. We would love to see you in one of them. The QR code and webpage on the screen will take you to our page. I also dropped it in the chat if you're interested in learning more. Before we get started, I have just a couple of housekeeping items. First, as you probably noticed, this is a Zoom webinar format, which means that we can't see or hear you, but we do hope to engage with you as some people already are doing in the chat. The chat is open to you all, so please feel free to say hello there right now, but then also throughout the presentation today, you can drop any comments and especially any questions that you might have for our presenter. We will have time for Q&A at the end, and we really do want to hear your questions and engage with you in that way. So please feel free to use that. Also, today's program is being recorded, and that recording will be posted sometime tomorrow on our website, which is listed there on the screen for you. And I also dropped that into the chat, which I will do several more times throughout today's presentation. And then one last little housekeeping item or just rather announcement, it really just to say happy Social Worker Month. March is Social Work Month. So if you are a social worker, if you are a social work student, thank you for all that you do for your clients, for our communities. Thank you for all that hard work. We hope you feel recognized. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, also a fellow Sarah Lucan, who is our Associate Director of Admissions and Recruitment here at the Brown School, and she is going to introduce today's speaker. Sarah?
Thank you, Sarah Sims, and welcome to everyone. So glad to have you here for another installment of our curriculum showcase series on Open Classroom. I'd like to thank Sarah and the Brown School Professional Development team for partnering with the Office of Admissions and Recruitment to bring this really great series to you all, especially to our prospective students who may be in the audience today. Thank you all so much for joining, and thanks to community members who are here as well. We hope that what you gain from this open classroom is a little more knowledge about the topic being discussed, and for prospective students, maybe even some admitted students, because I know many have received admission decisions already, a sense of what you can expect in the classroom with the renowned faculty members who are being featured in this series. Today's session specifically offers a sample of the type of issues addressed by our social impact leadership and management related curriculum in the Master of Social Work program. I am pleased to introduce today's speaker, Barry Rosenberg, who is a professor of practice, the co-chair of the Social Impact Leadership Concentration, and the chair of the Management Specialization in the Brown School Social Work program. Barry's passion is human service excellence. He prepares graduates and current professionals to skillfully manage and lead human service organizations, which improve lives, build communities, and transform society. Barry teaches courses in leadership, management, organizational behavior, and the innovative Brown Consulting course. He has also led executive education, having designed and taught CEO seminars, including Inside the CEO, and for senior managers preparing to advance their careers, a course called Building a High-Performing Governing Board. His scholarly work focuses on leadership, nonprofit board governance, professional development, and the application of social work knowledge and skills to Jewish organizations and fundraising. Barry leads the Center for Human Services Leadership as part of the Delmar Divine co-location facility. The center conducts education, applied research, and convenings to support organizational capacity in the St. Louis region. And with that, I will turn it to Barry.
Thank you, Sarah and Sarah. So let me just take a second to share my screen, make sure I share the right screen. Terrific. You can all see that, so we should be good, I think, right? And so welcome everybody. Good afternoon or morning or evening, depending on where you are. I saw a few of our former students or on the webinar, so it's nice to see you, and maybe you'll have a question or send a message. So if you hang around the nonprofit world, you have often heard this admonition that nonprofits need to be strategic. And that phrase is often used to sort of signify organizations need to be logical and rational. They need to be focused on their mission. They need to really focus on the big picture and not get too tied up in the weeds and lose perspective on what's going on. And there's a tremendous emphasis on organizations needing to have strategic plans. An organization that doesn't have a current strategic plan is often perceived as somewhat less, maybe almost illegitimate. Certainly, virtually every funder will demand a strategic plan from the organizations that are making grant requests. We're going to touch on strategic planning, but first we really need to understand what we mean by strategy. And it's a word that's used many different ways by different people and not with the same precision. So I want to give you a framework as how I understand it, as how we teach strategy here at Brown, as well as at the Olin School of Business. And so our goals today are really to define organizational strategy. We'll dig into a few concepts such as the value proposition, differentiation, competitive advantage. And we're going to do that all by illustration with a really interesting case from a local St. Louis organization, Family Forward, which has worked with us in our teaching and makes a lot of information and insight available to us. And we'll save plenty of time for questions and answers, so I look forward to those as well. So let's assume for a moment that you want to start a new nonprofit organization. And your idea is that you want to prepare children for adult success. And that's a gorgeous vision. It's your purpose in the world. But lots of organizations actually share that vision. So you need to sort of narrow a little bit, and you need to define your niche in this massive agenda of preparing children for success. And you decide that you're going to really focus on success at school. And that we can define as your mission, right? And then you further decide that the way you're going to do it, because there's many ways that you might be able to contribute to school success, is you're going to offer a parent training program. That's your program component. So we go from vision to mission to program. You decide that you're going to focus your efforts on families who are living in historically underserved communities. And we could define that as your market, right? And now the only question, once you've sort of designed all of this, is how are you going to sustain it, right? Now you could charge a fee for service like a business would, but it's kind of unlikely that the parents in your service area are going to be able to absorb full cost. Now, maybe you're going to offer a sliding scale for parents, but more than likely you're going to actually have to solicit charitable support from foundations, from government, from individuals. So that's sort of our starting point. What are we trying to do? So at its simplest, when you've answered those questions, you've actually created a strategy. Strategy is composed basically of three components. Your mission, which is what you do. And here, in this case, you're going to train parents to support their children's school success. Your market, the lower income parents residing in underserved communities. And then we get to your sustainability strategy, maybe a mix of sliding scale fees and different kinds of philanthropy, right? So it's a very simple, really three-part idea, but we'll add some stuff to it in a moment. perhaps the most significant theory that helps explain how nonprofits work and why nonprofits do what they do, as well as for-profits, is known as resource dependency theory. Now, we often assume that nonprofits and for-profits really are very, very different, and that the laws that govern them to succeed are different. In the world of business, it's all about competition, right, for profits. But in the nonprofit world, we often talk about the importance and the need for collaboration. Now, collaboration is clearly important if we're trying to address large social issues. But in truth, nonprofits also have to compete. They have to compete for critical resources. Now, obviously, that's money, but that's only one. They have to compete for quality staff. They have to compete for having the right information to do their work. They have to compete to have the best technology. They have to compete for public visibility in their image, right? So we focus on this idea of resource dependency, and the resource dependency theory tries to answer how the environment either facilitates or impedes the organization's access to resources. So those of you who have ever gone looking for grants, you know that you're not going to qualify for all grant opportunities. There's a limitation to what you might get. On the other hand, a new foundation may come on board, or a new government program may come on board that you would be eligible for. So on one hand, the environment may facilitate your access to resources, but it also can impede. Right? The third part of this is how an organization actually uses existing resources to create new resources. So one example is devoting staff time to recruit, train, and manage volunteers that expand your resources to provide services or do administrative tasks. Another way is maybe you have some excess office space, so you decide to rent that out to another individual or another organization to generate new resources for the organization. Now, two pieces of resource dependency are important as we understand strategy in general. One is that organizations strive to reduce their dependence on others, other organizations or other individuals, right? Because dependence on others limits our own independence, our own ability to make decisions that we want to make for our organization. You know, it's not much different than a parent, right, who limits the independence of their child because the child is dependent on them for financial support. So on one hand, organizations strive to reduce their dependence because it limits their ability to make decisions. On the other hand, organizations strive to increase the dependency of other organizations or others on them, and that will improve their sense of independence, maybe their influence, maybe their access to resources, as well as their sustainability. Our students currently are working on a project with an organization that provides free eyeglasses to children primarily in underserved communities. And it does that with a mobile vision clinic that goes into various schools and offers immediate testing, as well as they can produce those glasses on site. There is another organization that provides a similar service, but not to the same scope and not to the same quality. So this organization has a good niche in the market, but it's now trying to raise the funds to add a second mobile clinic so it can expand its vision and make more schools dependent on it for a very, very valuable service that it provides. So we then have to focus on value. People will use a product or a service, or they'll pay for it if it provides value. So our strategy must have a solid value proposition. And we can think about value from three different perspectives. We can think of value to the user. We can think of value to the beneficiary. We can think of value to the customer. Now, in the for-profit world, most of the time, the user, the beneficiary, and the customer are the same. I go out and I buy a telephone. I'm the user. I'm pretty much the beneficiary, and I also paid for it. I'm the customer. But as you probably know, in the nonprofit world, sometimes we have to disaggregate those three components. In our case, the parent is going to be the user, but the beneficiary is really going to be the children. And the funder or the customer is going to be the government grant or the foundation that decides to provide support. So in our strategy, we have to actually think of the value proposition to each of those three components. And sometimes it gets challenging because they may compete. The user may want the highest quality service with the best accessibility and opportunity. And the funder, maybe a government organization, may want to provide the same service for the lowest possible cost. From that point, we then have to look at maybe the heart of defining strategy, which is differentiation, right? Differentiation can be sort of illustrated with this situation. Let's assume you're a chef and you're ready to open your first restaurant and you want to open a Chinese restaurant. You do a little market research and you discover there are already two restaurants that are in your area. So you think back, well, maybe we should do Mexican because there's no Mexican restaurant in our area. That'll give us a differentiation. Or maybe you might decide that you're going to still stay Chinese, but you're going to do it different than most. You might specialize in a particular cuisine from a remote part of China that others are not familiar with. Or maybe you go in an entirely different direction and you want to create a buzzy nightlife environment. You want to have a cool bar. Maybe you want to have signature cocktails that mix and match with the dishes. You want to create sort of a date kind of an environment. And so this idea of differentiation is, on one hand, you might do something different, or you might do the same thing differently or better, right? So one way is we're going to go Mexican. The other way is we're going to come up with a different way of doing Chinese that creates a differentiation in the marketplace. Now, we're very familiar with various for-profit and, in some cases, nonprofit differentiators. It can be low cost, can be best product, it can be superior service, or it might be something like accessibility, the ability to actually get and use that service. Differentiation leads us to the question of the concept of competitive advantage, right? Competitive advantages are part of our value proposition, and they're part of the way we differentiate ourselves from others. The definition of a competitive advantage is an asset that the organization has that it can leverage to compete for needed resources. So we can think about location, moving into an area where other services aren't there. We can think about an accessible schedule that maybe provides services after hours or on Saturdays, so make it easier for people to get there. We can think about things like providing superior service because we have the best trained workers. Maybe our service provides transportation to enable people to come there. Other things like an affluent board of directors that is capable of providing funding or maybe leveraging funding can be seen as a competitive advantage. And sometimes the same dimension can also work against us as a competitive disadvantage, right? If we are not accessible, that may limit the use of our service or our program. think I went in the wrong direction. Sorry about that. And then we should talk for a moment about strategic planning, right? For me, strategic planning is really about the health of the organization. It's about how our organization is going to achieve sustainability. And in a classic strategic planning process, we're going to reconsider our vision, our mission, our values, maybe even some of our programs to decide if they're still relevant, if they're still working, if they're still meeting the market. We're going to do that classic SWOT examination. We're going to look at our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, and our threats. And then we're going to drill into several key issues, maybe our revenue mix. Maybe we want to look at market expansion, going into a new area or adding a new program. Maybe we want to look at maybe our organization can be strengthened with a strategic alliance. Or maybe the big issue for us right now is we have to work on staff development and build out our staff. Or maybe we have to create some improvements to our actual services. So that would be a series of processes that we would work through. They all build around this question of sustainability and the long-term health of our organization. And we have to really be clear that strategic planning is about making choices. It's about what we're going to do, but it's also about what we're not going to do. And if you ever see a strategic plan that's just filled with lofty goals, it's actually not being terribly strategic. Another concept that's really important to understand from a strategy perspective is organizational alignment, right? Organizational alignment is about making sure that all the elements of the organization are working together smoothly. The best analogy I can give, if you understand rowing and crew, is thinking about that 8-person crew working together, going down the river, gliding beautifully, everything synchronized, right? And so this McKinsey model looks at the elements that need to be coordinated in terms of alignment so that everything is working smoothly. And what you'll notice is that right at the very, very center is the issue of shared values. And shared values is about the organizational culture, right? Organizational culture, really important concept. We understand it as the underlying values and beliefs and norms of behavior that sort of come together in what I like to say, the way we do it around here. And the way we do it around here in this organization may be a little bit different, or maybe even a lot different than the way we do it around here in another organization. And the idea of organizational alignment and strategy is that if we change an element of our strategy, maybe we create a strategic alliance, or maybe we decide to expand our service area, or maybe we decide to sunset a program, we really need to systematically look at all of these elements and decide if other changes need to be made to make sure that we continue to operate really smoothly. So now let's get into the case. And I want to assure you that we have permission to use this case as an educational tool. We use it in our class all the time. And I want to tell you about this organization, Family Forward. And you can see its mission is Family Forward moves vulnerable children in the direction of hope by delivering comprehensive therapeutic and educational services to support biological, foster, and adoptive families, right? Now, its programs, I'll get to that in a second, I'm sorry. The organization was originally founded in 1891 as the Children's Home Society of Missouri, had a long history of providing adoption services, education and training for adoptive families, support for families, as well as residential and respite care in terms of the adoptees. If we look at it today, multifaceted, and this will all make a little bit more sense as we work through the case, it has what's known as its Developmental Trauma Center, where it provides assessment, treatment, occupational therapy, parent education, and consultation. It has right next door to it an early childhood center focused on children who have developmental needs built around developmental trauma. It has a very big program in terms of education and training, both for adoptive and foster parents, but as well as training professionals in its particular methodology. And it provides a variety of community services. So the step one in our case goes back a number of years to about 2012, when the organization decided that it wanted to adopt a methodology of, or not so much a methodology of treatment, but a model created by Dr. Bruce Perry called the Neurosequential Model of Therapeutics, or NMT, right? And the focus of this model is developmental trauma, specifically. There are many kinds of trauma. This is about developmental trauma. And the organization and leadership became intrigued by Dr. Perry's ideas. And in 2012, they began to train their staff to be certified to deliver services through this MNT model. And at that point, they were the only agency in the region that understood the model, and certainly that were providing services based on the model. So that was the beginning, going back to about 2012. The next step talks about a merger with Family Resource Center, or FRC, right? In 2015, the board of the organization said to the CEO, you know, we're in really good shape. We're financially secure. We have money in the bank. Why don't we look about what maybe is the next step for our organization? Maybe we might acquire an organization. Maybe we might do a merger. And the CEO went out and looked to identify an organization that it could work with. And Family Resource Center, which was in similar aligned work around adoption and working with children with disabilities, was an interesting and attractive potential partner. Had the same mission, and its CEO was then retiring. Very well-respected, terrific individual, but was now at a point of moving, ending his career and moving away. And they entered into discussions and they decided to merge their organizations. And this merger was really truly synergistic. It was about leveraging each other's opportunities and strengths. FRC already had a nursery program. It had its own building. And so the Children's Home Society was able to acquire the therapeutic preschool. FRC had a stronger fundraising board and more strength in the development side, so they got that competency. The Family Resource Center was able to define a future for the continuity of its mission. So in 2019, the organization adopted a new strategic plan. And the two big goals at that point were to align the organization with the question or the service issues of developmental trauma and the use of this NMT model, and then to become a Child Trauma Academy flagship site as certified supported by Dr. Perry. And then a wonderful thing happened. This should happen to all of you and all of your organizations. Initially, an unknown benefactor came forward because this individual, who the organization didn't know and for some time was kind of anonymous, was looking for an organization that was going to utilize the NMT model. And she offered a $1 million per year commitment for 20 years if Family Forward would double the size of its preschool. An incredible opportunity, right? And so initially, Family Forward decided to take that money and add a second school site to expand its services that way. And then COVID hit, right? And strategy can get screwed up pretty quickly by what goes on externally in the environment, right? So the expansion was put on hold, but a couple of other things happened that play out from a strategic perspective. They realized they were having real problems with these residences that were part of the organization and a historical part of the organization, but were only serving 1.5% of their clientele. The facilities were old, they needed upgrades, and during COVID, they were really challenged to find qualified staff. And they made the critical decision to first suspend and then close these two residences. They were certainly able to find placements for their clients so that they were able to protect what those clients needed, but they started to realize that this was outside of the niche that they had begun to define for themselves through their strategic plan. Come back, 2021, they sold those residential sites. And then their analysis indicated that the preschool, which was the former Family Resource Center school, was really not in the right location. It was located in sort of South St. Louis City, but the children were not from that neighborhood. And so they really decided that that school was not serving their purpose, and they needed to create a new school. And using that donor's gift, which she then accelerated, so she paid it out quicker than her initial commitment, they purchased 2 adjoining buildings and commenced rehab. The Developmental Trauma Center, which is where they provide their case services, and the Early Childhood Center, which they built from, renovated from a building. At that point, as they were moving that, they decided to retain their former Family Resource Center office, which was, an office building, because they were beginning to grow and they didn't have enough space to put everybody in that new building. They planned to sell their previous offices, and then they went through a process of expanding and restructuring their senior staff to take advantage of the new opportunities that they were creating. So a lot of stuff goes on in 2021 to move the organization forward. And then more developments with the facility. So in the fall of 2022, the new Developmental Trauma Center opened. In January of 2023, the new Early Childhood Center opened. And then another interesting opportunity, they got a really attractive offer to sell that former Family Resource Center building, and they decided to do it. And then without that building and the expanding staff and program, they decided that rather than selling their former office, they would retain it, move their administrative staff there, and leave the program staff at the Developmental Trauma Center. So a lot of moving, but always adjusting to the needs of the organization and what's going on in the outside world as well. Coming up to 2022, a major move for them was to add their first trauma-informed occupational therapist. So as you can start to see, they're increasingly narrowing their focus and building out on this understanding of developmental trauma. They had one more program that didn't quite fit, which was a program they worked with women who had experienced domestic violence. There are a number of other organizations in the region that focus on domestic violence, and they said, we're narrowing, we're building around NMT and developmental trauma. This is a program that other people could do better. We don't need to do it. That's that idea of strategy of what will we do and what will we not do. So now all their services are aligned around developmental trauma. A big issue for them was that they needed to figure out ways to increase access to service. They had a very, very long waiting list, and what could they do and what strategies could they implement, because that could be a strategic disadvantage. and they wanted certainly access to become a strategic advantage. The program director became certified as a developmental trauma mentor, and they began providing this training to others in the region, right? They decided that while this is their niche and this is their expertise, they want to share it. And the way they share it, and this is also a way that they're able to generate revenues, is to provide training to others in the region to take advantage of this program. All of these moves positioned them to attract significant new funding. As they became more and more focused, more and more respected in this area, more funding was able to come in. And then they started to develop a research project, made a major presentation at a national conference about what they were doing. So they've always been willing to share. And that's that idea of being competitive for the success of the organization, but also being collaborative with the larger universe of organizations dealing with children. When we come up to 2023, they've expanded from 1 to now having 6 trauma-informed occupational therapists, and OT has become a major part of their service dimension. They hired their first full-time university-affiliated researcher so they can continue to refine their work and share it out. They've been focused on better strategies for managing that waiting list. And then they adopted a new strategic plan. 2023 would have represented the end of their prior strategic plan. And this is an interesting thing. They've been on this 11-year journey of new ideas, new developments, big projects, and so forth. And the alignment issue comes up. And they said in their strategic plan, we're going to take a deep breath for the next couple of years. We're going to make sure that all the pieces continue to fit together. We're going to sort of consolidate our wins. And then maybe in the next strategic plan, we'll look forward to new developments, new opportunities, new ways of providing service. So let me summarize what we've been talking about in terms of this strategy and the concepts that I introduced at the beginning of this webinar. 1, strategy is about mission, market, and sustainability. And what you've seen in this case is that Family Forward has continually refined and narrowed its understanding of its mission, its market, and its program. And with that focus, it's resulted in both organizational growth and the ability to attract new resources. It has to deliver a value proposition, in this case, to the user, to the beneficiary, as well as to the funders. And its value proposition that it is offering a superior therapeutic model in how it organizes its services in terms of meeting the needs of this particular market. Differentiation, well, it's built itself around developmental trauma and NMT. And in that regard, it is different than any other organization in our region that is providing services to children. Competitive advantages, well, that merger added important competencies that made the organization more competitive, initially in nursery, which it did not have, its fundraising ability, and then it's adding unique components to its service model, such as trauma-informed occupational therapy. Strategic plan, well, you've seen this as an organization that continually plans and then implements so that it can provide its services better. And then this issue of organizational alignment. It's been sunsetting services that don't really fit. It's adjusted its locations to take advantage of where the population is and to make itself more accessible to the people who are actually going to use those services. And it's done a lot of work in rebuilding and redesigning its staff structure to support this much larger, much more complex organization. And then resource dependency is expertise in NMT makes other organizations dependent on Family Forward for the training and the knowledge to better do their work. And that positions it to become more important, more influential, and ultimately more sustainable. So that's a quick dive into strategy, some of these key questions, these key concepts. And I think now I'm going to turn it back to Sarah to host our discussion and any questions that you might have. Sarah?
Great. Thanks so much, Barry, for that. Not seeing any questions yet, but want to remind folks, if you have questions for Barry or just thoughts about the case study, please feel free to post those in the chat. We would love to hear. Here we go. Thank you from Tomas. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. This question is, how relevant are financial metrics and statements to align the organization under its strategic goals? It seems in business, these metrics are much more important, yet there might be other more difficult to quantify metrics in nonprofits: community trust, impact, knowledge, and expertise.
I would say you almost answered the question the way you framed it. Look, clearly in the business world, it's all about financial metrics. What is your profit margin? Is the profit margin what you expect it to be? Are you on target to reach that? I would unfortunately say that in the nonprofit world, there are many organizations that really don't focus in a serious way on defining the right financial metrics. Very few have longer range financial plans that are tied to their strategic plan. But sustainability is all about the allocation and the ability to obtain resources. And so, yes, there are many other metrics that must be met, but finances are at the core of it. And if the finances aren't strong, the ability to implement quality services is going to be limited. So I hope that sort of answers your question. If you have a follow-up to that, I would love to hear it.
Thank you. Other questions from folks?
I couldn't have been that clear. Are there issues that you've encountered around strategy and strategic planning that are puzzling to you that you'd like to know a little bit more about?
And the comment back was, to your point, that makes sense. Money is kind of the enabler and maybe not the goal, but it certainly helps when wanting to reach these goals.
Ooh.
All right, now we got some more questions coming in. So this is a question from Faith, who works for a small startup. It has 3 full-time employees. They have wonderful intentions, but struggle to carry things to fruition with limited manpower. Do you have any advice?
I think one, I'm just looking at the other one. So why don't you,
yeah, if you want to think about that one a little bit.
Yeah, we can come back to that.
Let's see. How might an organization leverage donors and funders within a strategic conversation?
Do it. I'm sorry, just do it again. I just
Yep.
Yeah.
How might an organization leverage donors and funders within the strategic conversation?
That's a great question. If you think about that core process in strategic planning, the SWOT analysis that you do, that's the point where you should be sampling multiple stakeholders to understand their perspective on strengths, weaknesses, as well as opportunities and threats that the environment provides. Different than a business, in the nonprofit world, there are many stakeholders who have a legitimate or maybe believe that they have a legitimate stake in the direction of the organization. Obviously, your staff, obviously your funders, certainly your clients and users, but maybe the community that surrounds your organization, where you're in interaction with people who are not necessarily clients. And so really thinking about sampling and getting, whether it's the use of focus groups, surveys, targeted interviews, to really try to get a sense of what the world thinks about you. We often talk about how we promote our brand, and we want to make sure that we have a really positive brand out there, but we don't control our brand. We don't control how people understand us. That develops through our interactions with people, and therefore we really have to listen to people. So I think it's really, really important. I would say it should really be a key part of that initial phase in the strategic planning process. Because internally, you may think that this is the question that we need to solve, or this is the direction we need to go. And then you start to hear from your various stakeholders, no, there are other things that you actually have to pay attention to. It's a great question. I'm going to stop looking at chat. I'm just going to listen to you, Sarah.
Yeah, sure. So I'll go back to Faith's question, get a little more context too. So they're talking about having, working for a small startup that only has 3 full-time employees, and they have wonderful intentions, of course, but struggle to carry things to fruition because of just the limited amount of folks that they have working there. They need a strategic plan, but they're all too busy trying to put out fires. And so if you have any advice for, small startup businesses that are really trying to do well, but overwhelmed with the amount of work that it takes to start up a business on your own with limited resources.
Look, it's an enormously common reality within our world. The overwhelming majority of nonprofits are very small, highly resource constrained. I would say 2 things. Maybe the question for you is really not to try to get too elaborate, but to really key in on those 3 questions when you think about or those 4 or 5 concepts when you think about strategy. And so don't think about this as a massive undertaking. Think about this as something that you're really trying to answer several key questions. Are we clear about our mission, what our role in the world is, what we're going to provide? Are we really clear about the market that we're trying to serve, or do we have to think about that differently? And do we have a reasonable expectation of a sustainability strategy in relationship to resources? And then look at how you differentiate yourself from others so that you can be attractive, and what competitive advantages that you might have that you can promote to funders and individuals who you might be wanting to either approach in terms of your services or your funding. The other is whether you can recruit within your board structure 1 or 2 people who actually do have some competency around strategy, and really try to shift this role to them. Fundamentally, in a nonprofit, the board should own the strategy and should actually own the strategic plan. And I would try to see if you could recruit 1 or 2 people, if you don't already have them, that maybe with a little of their own exploration and maybe some training, going to a workshop on strategic planning could actually try to lead that process for you. But you're not alone. A lot of organizations are struggling with that same situation.
Going back to kind of donor relationships, there's a couple questions. How do organizational leadership ensure its donors have buy-in? with their changing and evolving strategic goals. And then there was a comment, I've seen organizations bend toward donor priorities and then they don't focus on their goals. So you want to comment on just maintaining positive donor relations?
Look, the question of mission drift in response to available resources is real. And maybe at times that can be okay, that it may open up. I mean, if you think back to Family Forward, a lot of their development was based on the fact that a donor came and said, I like what you're thinking about. I want you to do more of it. So that moved them in certain directions. But trying to really be clear about what the opportunities are and what fits for you. On the other hand, and let me just say again, I'll just reiterate this phrase, strategy is about what you will do. It is equally about what you won't do. And being comfortable at saying what we won't do is really, really important. Proactively engage them and keep them connected to that process. In a change process, if your organization is really going through some strategic changes that are not just internal things that you're doing, but really have external visibility, the critical factor is over communication. And that exists for your staff and your funders, over communication. And saying why you're doing it, we talk about making sense making. Helping people understand the context for that, getting their input into it so that they're being heard. And oftentimes they're going to come with some really interesting observations that you might not have thought about. And saying it over and over again in somewhat different ways, but the same basic message. When you think you've said it enough, say it again. Over communication is the fundamental rule of change management.
Great. I agree with that very much. I like this question. How can someone who is not in a leadership position bring up or get involved in strategy, especially if there isn't a recent strategic plan?
Yeah. So we have a conception in our society that leadership is about the person at the top, person sitting behind the desk in a big chair, telling other people what to do. That can be the CEO, that can be the board, okay? Fundamental rule is that authority is not leadership. Authority is not leadership. Authority will help. If you can tell people what to do, well, then you can influence direction. Leadership is about influence. Leadership is about influencing the beliefs, the values, the ideas, and ultimately the behavior of others. And leadership can be conducted by anybody from any position. Now, there's a lot of skill or thought about how you do that. But what I would say is really think about what it is you want to try to influence and start to think about the strategies that you can use to try to bring that forward. There's a lot of great material on influence and what are known as influence tactics. The one that we always think about is just make a good argument and other people will hear you and understand and agree. But think about being a coalition, bring together a couple of other people in your organization who feel the same way and coming forward with a conversation. I always use a very simple example. When I was CEO of an organization, some of the staff thought that we were not being ecologically sound. They didn't like that we were using a lot of styrofoam cups and things like that. A few of them got together. They developed a sort of a set of ideas of what they wanted. They walked into my office and said, this is what we think we ought to do. And I said, great, let's do it. Because it made sense. And they were just taking the initiative. So this is something to think through. It's not to be frivolous or not to be just cavalier, but you should feel empowered to share your ideas, to share your observations, right? and to try to influence organizational strategy in ways that you think are important. And I would come back to some of those core ideas and how does that align with what you're thinking, and then try to bring it forward. Sometimes leadership will be receptive. Sometimes you may need to push a little bit. And we talk about this whole idea of managing up. How do you get the people who you report to understand what you need to do your job better? So yeah.
Thank you. Melody wants to know if you could elaborate more on organizational alignment and how someone in a leadership role might help the rest of the leadership team consider these implications when deciding what strategies to pursue or what current strategies to discontinue.
Yeah. So look, I think the one that most people understand and resonate to really quickly about alignment is mission. Is this really within our wheelhouse? That gets back to this notion of mission drift and so forth. But I would say that within a management structure, that little model that I put up, the 7S model, and there's literature you can get that will flesh that out a little bit about what that means. That should really be an intentional process. We're making changes. Well, what does that really mean for the staff competencies? And maybe I should just go back to that for a second, just to put it back up. If I can get my thing to work. All of a sudden, it's not working. There we go. Let me just share it for a second. Right? Oh, there. Oh, I gotta go to here. Okay, from current slide. For some reason, it's not going there. Let's go back.
There we go.
Did it come up? There.
Yep.
There we are. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Somehow, me and Tech, I'm an old man. Tech and I are not really friends. So you really want to start to think, what does this decision or this change mean in terms of the skills we need, in terms of staff, the number of staff, the competencies of the staff? What does it mean about our operations, some of the processes we use to manage clients, to manage programming, to manage events, whatever it is? Maybe if we're making a change, we need to reconsider part of our structure, who reports to who communicates with who, how we coordinate a new piece of work. So I would say that the core issue is to take this kind of model or other models that are similar and systematically ask those questions, because we often forget that these things need to be aligned, and we find out a lot later that there are really glitches in the process because we haven't gone through that. So that would be the core. I hope that answers a little bit, but if you want to follow it up, I'd be happy to.
We are coming to close to the end of our time. And
Yeah.
so let's see. Yeah, Sarah's back. So I'll go ahead and turn it back to Sarah. But no, Barry, I think your responses were really great. Thank you all so much for your really wonderful questions. To those questions that we were not able to get to, let us know if you want to reach out. I know Barry's always been really great about, having conversations with folks who have questions about this kind of work. So
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. Thanks, Sarah, for helping to organize. And of course, thank you, Barry, for sharing all of your knowledge and experience with us today. As a reminder, today's program was recorded and will be posted tomorrow on our site. The QR code there and the website can take you to it. And you can view today's presentation, but also over 200 other presentations, some of which are also by Barry, if you're interested in organizational leadership and want to dig in more. So we invite you to view any of our past programs And then we hope you'll join us for our next Open Classroom Live program, which is Tuesday, April 9th. And that is reimagining qualitative research with generative AI with one of our associate professors here at the Brown School, Dr. Rupeng An. I dropped a link to that in the chat as well. This one, again, it's Open Classroom, so it's free and open to all. We hope to see you next time. And thank you again for joining today, everybody. Bye.
Could be